Welcome to the Forest School Podcast, a show where I, Lewis, and my co-host, Wem Southerner, set out to explore a shared pedagogy. It's a space where cerebral thinking matters more than craptivities, where educational purpose outweighs pretty resources, and where inclusion is more than just a buzzword. Join us as we overthink the trivial, deep dive into whatever sparks our dopamine, and reflect on what it means to truly hold space for others, holistically and without judgment. Thanks for being here. We hope you enjoyed this episode. So, at 8, for the first time today, we went and collected stinging nettle seeds.
Oh, lovely.
Not stinging nettle leaves, stinging nettle seeds.
Did you get a buzz? Did you get a buzz? I feel they're really like caffeine for me.
Yeah.
I think they are.
Not at all. I told so many people about this where I was like, listen, I looked up about nettle seeds and like they're called an energizer and they might keep you up, don't have them too late. Absolute rubbish.
Nothing.
I do not believe it.
Really?
I do not believe it.
But where are you on your caffeine journey right now? Are you on like minimal caffeine or are you right back up there?
So I have, for people, because we've mostly discussed this off the podcast, I would have to say about 2 months ago now, I went from having like a semi-lethal amount of caffeine, like 600 milligrams ish a day, which is like 3 or 4 big cans of energy drink, just stopped basically overnight. And I maybe now have had like a can of Coke a week. Like
Amazing.
that's
still
been
there.
it. Yeah, but
and the nettle seeds they weren't like a little
nettle seed like addict now. Oh yeah, I've been slapping my elbow veins and just put a line of nettle seeds on the table and just
yeah straight in there.
Straight in. That's how you get them. And I was buzzed for a toddler session. Toddler group. Because okay, here's the segue. You ready for the seamless segue?
Sure.
Because
I can't even imagine. Me
snorting nettle seeds is not just me having an effect on the nettle seeds, but it's the nettle seeds having an effect on me, which is as we will hear in this episode, an intra-relationship, a post-humanist. I don't think Dr Jo Hume would appreciate me snorting nettle seeds as a metaphor for their
Probably
work,
not.
but that's what's happened now. We're chatting to Dr. Jo Hume, who you met at the symposium, didn't you?
Yeah, about a year ago. And then I assaulted her on the internet, by which I mean I sent her an email going, hello, be on my podcast, please. She was like, okay.
Because you'd just done a load of stinging nettle seeds, hadn't you?
Exactly. I was feeling very brave. And she obliged us with her company and her time.
Chat.
And we talked all about her research in Forest School. So, you can call her, I reckon, quite confidently, a Forest School academic, or at least an educational academic with a particular interest in Forest School. So she talks about her thesis that she wrote. She talks a bit about her university lecturing work. She talks about the ideas that she originally had about Forest School research when she was starting to, after she'd been taking her class outside for quite some years, and some things intrigued her about Forest School, and then how her research ideas changed over time. And we talked about like weird methodologies and
the different ways you can do research. It's so cool.
Yeah, and different ways of looking at the world. And it's nerdy.
This is definitely one.
I love it.
It's very nerdy and geeky in the scale of, sometimes we put these and go, where is this in your Forest School career? I think this is quite far down the line in that I think you might be in the realms of thinking about art, scientific articles and researching things, but that doesn't have to be quite far in, I suppose. But I would say this is not the what's the best type of knot to use on my shelter. This is like some absolute brain juices flowing around, doing
jamming.
all the things. Concept jamming, which is in another book that we're going to talk about at a different time.
I can't wait to talk about it though, because it's so good.
That's going to be a good one. We'll save that. We'll save that one. Before we go, thank you to everybody. There's more and more people on the Patreon every month. It really does mean a huge amount. The recording software and the equipment that we use, and also the time that it takes for us to sort of liaise back and forth with guests and do all this stuff. Obviously, we get a huge amount out of it, but it means the world, not just to help with the financial side of that, but actually I've written this because everybody who joins Patreon gets a nice little postcard sent handwritten from me And I do always mention how much it means to know that people are valuing this. So if you are valuing this kind of like growing body of work, this kind of journaling that we are doing, please do head to patreon.com/Forest School Podcast. You can email us, admin@the Forest School Podcast, if you've got like stuff you're like, you guys need to know about this, or oh my god, I just want to send you love and say how much I love these things. It's always great joy to read.
Yeah, and you can review the podcast as well if you don't have any spare dollar. You can review it on whatever app you use to listen. That really helps us as well, and it gives us a little boost, doesn't it, when we get little boost. Comments.
Share it with your friends. Put it all over your social media. It's lush.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you so much. Let's get into the chat with Dr. Jo Hume. Are you ready? And then you say yes. I assume that what you mean is yes, you are ready. Not yes.
I was ready. I was ready. And then I had a little thought. And then I thought, no, be confident. Don't ask that question. Just style it out. I'm very excited. We're here today with Dr. Jo Hume. The question I was going to ask Jo, is it Northumbria University?
Yes. It is.
Excellent. That's the thing I was going to ask. But yes, so we met Jo a year ago now at the Forest School Research Symposium, which incidentally we have a whole, maybe 2 podcast episodes about, listeners, if you're interested, where we spoke with lots of joyous people there. And Jo did a wonderful presentation all about Forest School, all about her research, about what's so special about Forest School, touching on post-humanism and new materialism and all kinds of like juicy concepts, which basically blew my mind. So I reached out to Jo recently and said, Jo, can you please come and talk with us on the podcast about it? And Jo, you've also done a Forest School Association webinar as well about your research quite recently as well, haven't you? I don't know whether that's available to watch again on the website. It might be, but I couldn't find it, which was one of the reasons I wanted to grab you on the podcast to record something, I guess, for posterity, really. So thank you so much for joining us. Do you mind kind of introducing yourself, talk about your journey, what got you to this point and what you do now?
Yes, sure. So first of all, thank you so much for inviting me. I do remember us meeting and seeing you at the Forest School Symposium with your recording equipment and talking to everyone. So yeah, it's so great to be reminded of that event, which was such an amazing coming together of practitioners and academics and all talking about really interesting things. And yeah, it was so great for me to be there because my background is not purely Forest School or purely academic, so I have a little bit of a mixed background as well. And as soon as I got there, I felt like I was in really good company. There were so many different people from different backgrounds, but all brought together by this love of Forest School that the whole program seems to sort of engender in people, doesn't it? So yeah, a little bit about my background, how I came to be so interested in Forest School. So my early background is a primary school teacher, very much an early years specialist. So I have run nursery units and reception classes, and one year went as far as year 2. Didn't like it so much. Went back to the early years. And it was during that time, and this was probably in around about 2010, 2011, I went to a presentation that was run by a local education charity. It wasn't actually a Forest School charity, because this was quite early on when Forest School wasn't really a thing. I had never heard of it at that point. But I went to a presentation, and it was about a project where the charity had supplied funding for early years settings to take their children into a woodland setting every single week throughout the seasons. And I watched these presentations about what the practitioners and the children had got out of it, and I was just absolutely, my mind was blown. I came away thinking, that's what I want to do. So I at that time had a nursery unit I was running. It was as much the vibe from the practitioners who'd been involved as much as what the children were getting out of it. I was like, you know what, this is, why aren't I doing this with my children? So I sort of connected with this charity, and at that point I was moving into reception year, so age 4 and 5-year-olds, and actually at that age it's much easier to take them out of school and do things because they're just that little bit older. So as a primary school teacher, I established this practice that we called going to the woods, and we took the reception class, 2 reception classes on Wednesdays and Thursdays, so 1 class on each day, but every single week throughout the year, and we basically let them lead the learning. So at that point, I'm a teacher, but I don't really have any, I don't have training in forest school skills, and I'm only just beginning to hear about forest school. And sort of thought, well, maybe what I'm doing isn't forest school because it hasn't got that sort of branding on it, but it's definitely something. And when we did it, the impact on the children was just so undeniable. I remember the first year I sort of sent this reception class up to year 1, and they'd had this whole year visiting the woods. And the year 1 teacher said to me, "Jo, what have you actually done to these children?" And I was like, okay, what do you mean? And she said, "Well, they're great, but they just keep asking me why we're doing things." She said they're just so sort of independent, and they just seem to want to know the reason behind things. And I was like, well, maybe it was all that time of just doing their own thing, and we sort of followed their interests and tried to support them. But it was very much a child-led version of what I think now I would call forest school, but forest school without some elements of what forest school practice normally is. So some years later, so I sort of ran that for about, I think, 5-6 years, and happily it's still going on at this school. So it did become really popular. It became, as many schools have sort of done now, it became part of the practice because teachers can see that it seems to have a really positive effect on the children who take part. So I moved into academia. So I did my master's degree in education, did a little bit of lecturing, and moved to Northumbria University in 2016. And eventually got my PhD. And even at the job interview, when I was interviewed for the job at Northumbria, and they actually said to me, "So you will need to do a PhD," because that was the thing at the time. That was a condition. What do you want to do it on? What's your topic? So even back then, I knew it was going to be forest school. So I could sort of leave the classroom behind quite happily, but I didn't really want to leave forest school behind. So that became my thesis topic. And it did evolve and develop over the course of the years. So it was a kind of a part-time 6-year program with me being a full-time member of staff as well. And it was during that time that I discovered post-humanism and these other kind of ideas that blew my mind. So at the moment, I'm just now really interested in talking about my ideas, maybe trying to do a bit more research, and obviously still lecturing and working with in teacher education at Northumbria. So that was my potted biography there.
I am excited here that you're involved in lecturing in teacher education, and I was wondering whether you have the scope to talk not just about forest school, but about perhaps alternative pedagogies and educational ideas that maybe challenge the mainstream, and whether you have the scope to do that in teacher training where you are, or not really.
So certainly, as a higher education institution, we do, especially on the undergraduate route into teaching, when we have 3 years in which to do this, have time to talk about alternative approaches. Having said that, we are quite tied by the curriculum for initial teacher training. So there's a lot of national curriculum subject content teaching, for example, that we need to cover. So we're not as free as in my dreams I would like to be, because we have to get our students to obviously get that accredited qualification at the end. That is quite narrow, sort of subject and pedagogy focused. So what happens in practice, and I think this is really interesting and reasonably new in terms of even in the years that I've been at Northumbria, trainee teachers will get placed in schools where the school is doing a forest school program, and that's happening more and more. So it's a little bit of a lottery for them whether they actually get to experience forest school, but very often the ones that do come back absolutely inspired by it. So for example, I was talking to one of my students last week who's just got a job at the school where she had her placement, which is great, and she already had an interest in forest school, and they've basically asked her to run some forest school provision and given her a little bit of the field and just said, well, okay, go and you've got a year, just knock yourself out and make it into a forest school and take some of our sort of challenging year 5 boys and make a group for them. And it's very much more of a grassroots word of mouth movement than a top-down Department for Education movement. And we are probably somewhere in the middle, trying to meet both those agendas, maybe.
Yeah.
That's in some ways, I guess that gives you some flexibility that you might not have, sitting in the middle of those two things. Do you feel like you've got scope to, is it like, it sounds like what you're saying is maybe like exposure to forest school rather than directed, education about forest school? Is that?
Yeah. So at the moment, I would say that's what it is. Although I do know that in our science subject teaching, they do outdoor education strand. That's not specifically forest school. But for myself, I recently had a sabbatical term where I undertook the Forest School Association's level 3 forest school leader training. So I feel like that's something I would like to put into the program. And even if it's just as an enhancement for a really interested group of students who'd like to do that.
Can I ask what that's been like? Because I think that's becoming more, I was going to say more popular, but I think more common as a route. The people that I have on the training course that we run in the woods is more and more people are coming, it seems, who have like quite an experience of doing or running, sometimes even running forest school before they then go, I'm actually going to come get level 3s. Whereas even 5-6 years ago, I think there were lots of people who were like, I'm interested in it, but I've never seen it in person, and now I'm going to start the course. What was it like for you to have had such a big, like a long experience of kind of hands-on stuff before starting the course? Was there bits on the course where you were like, oh, that's very different to what I thought, or that's very in line with what I've experienced?
I'll tell you, I'll be totally honest, Lewis, that when I was a teacher and I used to take children to the woods, and I felt almost as if I didn't need that qualification because, I'm a teacher, I know how to work with children, I know about early years play-based pedagogies, I know about child-led learning, I'm perfectly capable of doing this without having this qualification. So yeah. I guess that was maybe a little bit of a prejudice of mine, and I almost wanted to go and do the training just to see what that would offer. Mm-hmm. And so, there was quite a lot of overlap in terms of play pedagogies. What I did learn was more of the bushcraft things, and particularly the safe use of tools and firelighting, which was something that I didn't really do with the reception children. So there was definitely a strand of skill teaching. And that was interesting and useful, and something that I think would be useful to share with the trainee teachers, even things about creating appropriate risk assessments. That was really interesting. And having said all that, I do still think that the fundamental thing is going to this wild place every week for the course of the year, and which I was doing already. And I still do think that's perhaps the essence of what makes forest school so special, is something about going to that place and it becoming your place. And in a sense, how much tool use you want to put in, or how many more slightly directed activities, maybe depends on the age of children that you're working with, or the particular needs of those, or what wishes of those children. But I think those parts of it they're sort of up for debate as to what you would want to put in. It's been really useful to find out a little bit more about how to do that kind of thing. But that sort of led me to where when I was writing my thesis, and I came up with this phrase, the 3 Fs of forest school. So that's something. I was thinking, if you take away the perhaps more locally based activities, so even if you think about the forest school movement internationally, so different countries might have different crafts that they want to introduce, or different tools that they want to use, or even different practitioners might have might feel more or less confident to use a bow saw or something. But
Yeah.
if you sort of took away those variables, what is it, if you actually get it down to its essence, that if you don't have these three things, it isn't forest school? And I had this idea of calling it the 3 F's of forest school. So I had frequency, where I meant it has to be more or less every week. You can't have a visit and then forget about it and then go next term. So frequency was one of the F's. Familiarity was the other one, and by that I meant it's to the same place. It's not a series of different trips to different places. It's making this place your own. So frequency, familiarity, and freedom was my other one. So however much you put out, invitations to play, you offer a bit of sort of skill teaching, actually fundamentally you are trusting children to lead their own learning in these sessions. So those are my 3 F's, and I sort of argued that actually that's fundamentally what forest school is at its heart. If you lose one of those, it's probably something else. It's an outward bound trip or a field study or something. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yes, that really distills it, doesn't it? And then in your research, you also sort of interpreted those 3 F's into kind of specific strands as well, didn't you? Can you tell us a little bit about those?
Yeah, so I can, and I'm just trying to think what's the best way to sort of go about it. So
Yeah, if you could just distill your thesis into 2 sentences, please.
My thesis in 5 minutes. No. So going from the 3 F's of forest schools, it basically translated into 3 big thesis themes, that you'll become very familiar with as you embark on your PhD study. So I had these. They were like big central chapters. The frequency one was thinking about looking at forest school through concepts of time, and trying to unpick whether our concept of linear time was the right concept of time to think about forest school, or whether there was another way to think about it, which I'm happy to talk about in more detail, because I think it's really interesting and maybe an aspect that's less well researched.
Yes, please.
Space. Go for it.
I'll go with time then. Okay, so one of the things and to be honest, I did my field work and visited the forest school over quite a number of years, because actually COVID happened in the middle, so there were these 2 chunks of field work with an unpleasant gap in the middle where we couldn't do it. So different children, same setting, but it was a lot of quite sort of complex and disparate data. It was video. Little video clips and written observations, a few interviews with some of the staff as well. So we walked around the site and did interviews and things. And then I sort of look at it all together and draw out some themes. Trying to look at it all through the lens of time. There was something it was actually a teaching student said to me that made me think, oh, actually, that is really interesting. And what she pointed out was, when children came back to the woods, they tended to go back to their place where they'd sort of left it off the week before. So like if they were interested in doing something, they were interested in going on a fallen tree that they were pretending was a ship, for example. So it's almost like that we had to stop, we had to go back to school. Then they would come back and the same children would just sort of go and carry on, almost as if the week hadn't happened. So I began to think, is there actually a different way of thinking about time where it's more of a continuation of experience that's kind of joined together, rather than the more conventional linear concept of time where 6 days have gone past and maybe you can't remember what you were doing. Actually, you can remember what you were doing, because you go back and suddenly I realised that I felt the same. I would tend to go and do the same things, or I don't know whether you feel that when you go back, but you have little things that you do, places that you like.
We've definitely noticed that in our practice, I would say, and I've really been interested in thinking about that, because observing children doing exactly what you've just described, so being immersed in something, going away, having a week off, coming back and being right back in there straight away, maybe with a couple of variations, but the same kind of play theme going on. And I have been really fascinated to wonder, does that live on in people's heads while they're away? Like, do they put there because I think I can remember being a child and it living on for me. So play that I did outdoors with my mates, very feral. Think like, drifting off to sleep and thinking about, oh, do you know what? When I go back there next weekend, I'm going to do such and such and such, and maybe having dreams about it, and it living on somewhere in the background of my mind. And I was really fascinated to know whether that's the same for the children that visited our woods, whether it lives on in a kind of alternate universe, dream world in their minds when they're not in the forest,
I think of it sometimes like, do you remember, this is going to really date this reference, but do you remember you used to, on like a VCR tape, if you paused it, it didn't exactly pause it. It would play the same sort of second just to keep it where it was, to just go, and that's sort of the metaphor that I think of when people go, is they're sort of just, because sometimes they come back with really almost stronger feelings about what they were doing when they left. When they come back, it might have been a passing thing, but it's almost like, because that tape has had 6 days to go, just relive that last bit over and over. They come back in and go, and of course I'm building this thing, we have to go back in. It's that like place memory, just like, because I think all your senses lock back in. If you're thinking about it at home, or that's sometimes why I find it interesting, because I know some people run their forest school practice and they maybe do their closing circle or their reflections or something in a completely different space, maybe like as extreme as like back in the classroom, we'll write up what we did, and I'm like, oh, you've pulled so many physical sensation tendrils out there to only sit in the memory one, whereas if you sit in the space, it's like the smell is the same, the air feels the same, the light feels the same, all of those things. Do you think that plays a role, Jo, in all the sense things?
Yeah. So absolutely, and you will sometimes see forest school research where they have for sort of maybe convenience reasons interviewed the children in a classroom, and I was thinking, oh, why didn't you do it there? Because it's so different. It's that sort of sensory, like you say, that rich sensory experience that is just so different from the rest of their lives, and it is almost so. In my thesis, I was looking. There are other conceptions of time that you can go and refer to. This is the kind of thing you have to do when you're doing your thesis. So I'm looking at, there's a French philosopher called Henri Bergson who has this idea that we tend to confuse time with space. So he says we have this real linear conception of time. So his idea was that if you listen to a church bell ringing and it sort of goes dong, 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 in your head, you're like spacing them out in space. But actually, that's not how we experience time. His thing is much more like what you've both described, that there are connections between different sorts of time. And it was his ideas that helped me to articulate. It's perhaps not all of that time we spend in the forest. It's not as simple as just a linear development. It's more like an alternative life running alongside your real life or your school life, like that playing out life when I used to have, like you, that seemed like a whole different experience, different rules. And I do think that it's just only a week goes past. So, even for young children, it's so repetitive. It allows them to develop maybe skills and attributes and things that they can't develop in other parts of their lives, but they can do it there because they just they haven't, the forgetting curve isn't very long. And like you said about the video, Lewis, they just can get back to it. They haven't forgotten what was happening in the previous episode or wherever they stopped the video.
I wonder if there's something in that about having an alternative universe or life or time running alongside your non-forest life that enables your brain like a muscle, because it is so different because it is outdoors. It's clearly another universe or another life or another thread of time. Whether being able to hold those two experiences and those two lives in your head enables you to be able to imagine different possibilities for your own life. Do you know what I mean? Like if you've got like your forest time and your forest persona and your forest experiences, and that lives on whilst you're doing maths on a Thursday afternoon or whatever, and you are able to go, oh, when I go back to being my forest person, I'm going to do this, that and the other. And what might happen? My friend might not like that idea. So I might do this. I might do, I could bring my special book, la, 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 la. And whether that experience as a child enables you as an adult or an older young person to be able to imagine alternative lives for yourself, to be able to go, do you know what? This, what I'm doing right now in the real world, in inverted commas, is one thing, but I could go over there and I could experience this and I could experience that. And what might happen if I did that? Do you know what I mean? Like developing that kind of thought capacity that children that don't have that extremely different experience to their everyday lives, as you describe on a repetitive basis in a familiar place, don't get that experience. I don't know. I'm just waffling now. But I just wonder if that's another
I love that
benefit,
idea because it maybe links back to my very early experience, which was feeling that it created a reception class who were quite proactive and asked questions, and because they'd spent all this time acting on the world rather than perhaps slightly passively sitting on the carpet, in school or in assembly, or sort of consuming video content or, tablets or whatever. They're actually just doing stuff, like you say. They've got ideas and they follow them through. It has to be powerful, doesn't it?
There's definitely something there as well about, just going back to what we were saying about having all those senses linked in to the space. You've got all your tendrils going out, and that there is something quite often. The space in which forest school takes place is kind of like held with a bit of reverence of like, just forest school happens here. I know sometimes it's been confusing when I've worked in schools and the school have had like a forest school area, but they also use it for natural science, and it's also the space where they come out and do like outdoor literacy. And then the association between like, this space means I'm this person is less, it is sort of more blurry. But I do think there's something about because I would say to me it feels, I'm doing this, I'm twisting my hands like I'm moving a bit of clay. It's like being able to press pause and have thinking time and have like planning time, that if you're in the flow of play, things can move at like a consistent speed. You have to keep up with it. You have to be in that moment. But then the gaps in between, like you say, there's a short drop off in memory, but it gives you the space to go, okay, so what if I responded to it like that? What if I introduced this resource? What if I always said, I think one of my favorite things is when people come to our sessions with something that they've brought from home. And I don't mean that as like an activity, but it can just be like a bear or a stick or a piece of clothing. And because what that tells me is you're thinking about this when you're not here. And that is a huge, I'm like, okay, this is going to sound like a weird statement, but when I go, I'm in your head. We're in your head now. And that's the sign, because when you're at home and you saw your teddy bear, you thought about forest school. That's very interesting that it's become part of your musings. You're taking this persona and holding it in other spaces.
That's really interesting, isn't it? Yeah, I love that. And actually, when I used to do it at the primary school, we used to go to a local park and just found this really old kind of neglected area right on the edge of the park. And some of the feedback I got from the parents after that first year was, my child doesn't want to go to the swings anymore. They want to take me to the forest school place, the place where we do forest school, and tell me about the trees and what we do here. It's a similar thing, isn't it? It's got into their head, and that's a place where I'm this person.
Yeah,
it's a whole different feeling from the person who gets pushed on the swings.
Yeah, totally.
It's more open. It's more, you can bring what you want to bring to it. It's non-linear, all of those things. Do you think that kind of persona in non-directed spaces, is that sort of where the work links to this kind of post-humanism thing, or is that a different aspect of it?
So I think, I should probably talk about post-humanism a little bit. And because it is the theory that framed this thesis, and it allowed me to perhaps be a lot freer with what I was looking at. So I'll just tell you a little bit about how I got there.
Please.
When I first started looking at forest school, actually my first instinct was to look at children's language, because I did have this feeling that the kinds of conversations that we would have in the woods were richer and perhaps more genuine than the sorts of conversations that we had in the classroom. And at that time I had the sort of gift of being their class teacher and also being their forest school person. So I could see that there was a little bit of a difference there, and maybe bringing connections back from the woods into the classroom and making those relationships. So I was very sort of child focused in the first part of my field work, and I wrote down what they said a lot. that was what I kept doing. And I kept sitting with the children who were talking a lot, and almost maybe sometimes the ones that weren't actually that active, but I was very focused on the language. Then COVID happened, and so I had a lot of time to think and look at my data and think, okay, what am I getting from this that's any different from what any other sort of qualitative researcher has got from Forest School? And my conclusion was not very much. So I'm seeing some great conversations, but I'm not really seeing why it's Forest School that's doing that. There was a sort of missing link. And it was around about this time that actually there was a film. I don't know if you've ever seen this film. It was on Netflix, and it was called My Octopus Teacher. I don't know if you've...
I haven't seen it.
I haven't seen it. I've heard about it a lot, and I actually am kind of scared to watch it because I know I'm going to get very emotional about it, and I'm basically going to start crying as soon as it begins, and then probably for several days afterwards. So that's why I've avoided it. But I've read your article about it, which was fascinating.
Right,
so
okay.
go ahead, explain to the explain to listeners about a little bit about that.
So that was just a moment when I was feeling really lost with my thesis, and I watched this little film about... it's about a free diver who keeps diving in the same place. He's going through a sort of personal crisis and depression, and almost like sort of self-care. He just decides to every single morning go and dive in this pool, in this sort of sea pool. I think it's off South Africa, and he sort of begins to almost befriend a little octopus that sort of sees him so many times it becomes unafraid of him. And I was watching it, and he has a lot to say about going to the same place again and again and again, and what that gave him. And as I was watching, I was thinking, oh, it's more about the place. It's something that I'm not seeing in my research about the place and the going to the forest again and again and again. That's just not coming through. And it was around about the same time that I was reading about post-humanism, which is it's a huge collection of theories and ideas. It's more than a podcast in itself, but fundamentally it's a sort of not a rejection of humanist values, but a challenge to humanist values, and in the sense that if we think about humanism, and so I'm really talking about sort of Euro-Western thought since the Enlightenment, and the development of scientific method, and this idea that there's a sort of pyramid of beingness, and man is at the top. And I'm saying man intentionally because it usually is a white man who's, like Leonardo da Vinci's Vitruvian Man. Sorry, Lewis, but it is.
Yeah.
And then sort of below that are, perhaps other nations, and then other animals, and all of nature is there for man to sort of use as a resource. And so, humanism has basically built the Western world, or the global north, or whatever you want to call it, and that's currently very problematic, isn't it? So it's potentially led to the climate crisis and sort of the evils of colonialism. So it's a huge field. Post-humanism is just saying, what if humans aren't the most important story in town? What if there's a lack of hierarchy? What if we try to look at things more differently? And once you begin to think that, then you start to think, okay, what if we want to not be trapped in some of humanism's big ideas, like sort of the difference between man and nature, for example? What if there isn't a difference between man and nature? What if people are entangled with nature and part of nature? And if we saw that a bit more clearly, perhaps we wouldn't have been in the current climate crisis. So that kind of thinking, that actually there are other ways to look at the world. And one of the ways that often comes to the forefront of people's thinking when they start to think about this is to look at how we are in terms of our relationship with the stuff around us and with matter, the actual stuff of being, that we're sort of always, that we don't exist in isolation, that there is no such thing as man sort of standing alone from nature. We're always in something, like, you're sitting indoors, or you're sitting outdoors, or you're always breathing air, and there's a continual unfolding entanglement of you with stuff. So that was a sort of broad theoretical idea that then started to guide my thesis towards, okay, let's look more at the stuff. So let's look at what's happening beside these particular beech trees, or let's look at how this space is changing throughout the course of the year, and how that feels. And let's look at how it feels to keep coming back to this same place again and again and again, and how it feels to be entangled in that, and how powerful it feels and how different it feels compared to perhaps quite an inert space like a classroom where it's always kind of the same. Is that making sense?
Yeah.
I've sort of done a big
Yeah, totally.
skip over a lot of big ideas.
You really summed it up there. And I'm trying to remember, in your presentation at the research symposium, I think you showed a photograph on the screen of a child holding onto a tree that was forked in 2 or 3.
Yeah.
And I think you posed the question to the audience, I think you said something like, what's the boy doing?
Yeah.
And we talked about that. And then I can't remember your exact phrasing, but you said something like, what's the tree doing to the boy? Or something.
Yeah.
Can you correct me? What? That helped me really understand it.
Yeah, I think it's one of those things that when you suddenly get it and you think, oh right, and you never quite see anything quite the same way again. But it was a boy in a tree, and he was in his favourite climbing tree, and we all called it the climbing tree. Even in the 2 different years, they always called it the climbing tree because it was just such a climbing tree. It was amazing. And he's sort of in this branch, looking directly at the camera, super relaxed. I'm pretty sure he'd said, "Take my picture," but but he's in this pose, and and people described him when you say, how would you describe him, and then I think the question is then, would he be able to be in that pose if the tree wasn't there? And I guess the obvious answer is no, he wouldn't. So then you say, okay, so how is the tree acting on him? And that's just that beginning to feel that that it's, rather than being in a relationship or interrelationship with nature, there's this a famous philosopher physicist called Karen Barad who came up with this phrase, intra-relationship. So you would say Max is in an intra-relationship with the tree. In other words, Max is acting on the tree and the tree is acting on Max, and together they're making something new. And that's what we're always looking at. Whereas I think what that does is it tries to get you away from only looking at ideas that themes that you've already sort of decided on, like conventional research approaches perhaps do. So they're looking for
curriculum outcomes, or all of those things.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So it's complex, but I think it's a really interesting way of looking at why it's so powerful. And I almost feel that more conventional accounts will often tend to have the forest as a kind of nice backdrop, but actually it's acting on us. It's huge. I mean, and I'm sure you guys will also find that it acts on you as well.
100%.
Oh, yeah, without a doubt. For better or for worse. It sometimes is one of those. That's actually because I wasn't in that presentation at the symposium, so this is the first time I'm hearing those examples, and that is so paradigm shifting, and it's like such a different lens to look at things through. It makes me wonder about whether you could maybe this is a hypothetical, but it's could you have, the question in my head is, can you have nature connection and not have these post-humanist ideas? And I was trying to think, as you were describing that then, I was trying to think of examples of someone who would, stereotypical example of who can I think of that would be I definitely have nature connection, but that they wouldn't see, because sometimes in part of our level 3 training, we will throw out different examples of nature connectedness and be so there's the, our thing, there's woo-woo hippies in the woods hugging trees, but there's also farmers that till land and till 200 acres. They have a connection to nature. It's a different connection to nature to mine. And then the really challenging one is sometimes the fox hunts will go past our woods and you go, that's their nature, that is a type of nature connection. And I'm going, but they would still have this kind of, maybe I'm talking myself out of it now, whether they would have that kind of intra relationship understanding of, I am doing the thing, the fox is doing a thing.
Yeah, I think it makes it more complex when you start thinking about it like that. I think a post-humanist approach would probably query the phrase nature connection, because it sounds like we're standing apart from nature, but actually we are all part of this unfolding process of being and becoming. So there's
Yes,
that.
okay.
Sometimes I think our Western language stops us from seeing things in a more entangled way. So I don't know if you've ever read Robin Wall Kimmerer's book, Braiding Sweetgrass.
Mm-hmm.
I'm sure you,
Yeah.
yeah. And she talks about how she has sort of indigenous background, but she doesn't speak the language of the Potawatomi tribe, which is in the Great Lakes. And she really struggles with the grammar until she begins to realize that actually many, many more things have animacy than she had previously thought. So trees have the same kind of grammar as people, but they're just kind of bigger, slower people. And it's all like you can get huge. Once you start looking at indigenous backgrounds, you begin to think that actually some of the limits of our thinking are the limits of our Western language.
Yeah.
There's a bit right where she's talking about the water as being a river, or the water as being a lake, or
Yes,
the water
yes,
as
exactly, yeah.
being a puddle,
Yes.
and that it will be something else when it's not here.
Yeah, yeah.
Is your head
I
gonna
love it,
pop
and
then?
I love that. Yeah, I just love that. Like the animism can be actually valued as a way of looking at the world, as opposed to that's something weird that weird people and children do. I think it's that's part of forest school is like completely owning that. We kind of think of it as quite a childlike way of looking at the world that is animistic. It's like that
Yeah.
tree has a spirit, has a soul, has an essence, has an energy, has an impact on me when I am near it, which is exactly what you're describing with that intra-action, isn't
Yeah,
it?
yeah,
And also what we were talking about earlier about like the forest is still acting on you when you're not even there, because you've had these experiences. You know, it's influencing and impacting your behavior and your thoughts when you're not even there, if you are a regular visitor to this place.
yeah.
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 Do you do you think forest school is rare in that case then, as an example of a space that continues to have an interrelationship when you're not there?
I think it's quite rare in today's experience of being in the world, especially for children, perhaps. Yeah, I think so.
Sorry, I was again. I'd gone off on a little thing and thinking about other spaces that we go in, and I was thinking about do people think about the classroom when they're not in the classroom? I think they probably more think about the teachers or their peers.
Maybe,
Do people think about their sports hall when they're not in the sports hall? Do you think But there's definitely something that is, and then so I was just exploring that of like,
and do we think we can have a relationship with a place or a tree? And is that similar to a relationship that we have with a person, or where are the boundaries there? I mean, maybe my thesis is trying, like you said, when I love when you said this idea about animism, and maybe the sort of more spiritual aspect is in this culture something for children and or weird people. But maybe my thesis was trying to philosophize the weirdness, because I think something that comes out of a lot of maybe more conventional forest school research studies, and there is definitely a need for conventional forest school research studies and project evaluations, because actually you need those in order to apply for funding and all of those things. So I do appreciate that we live in this world, but very often at the end they'll say something like, and there's something really special about forest school. And that was really my starting point. It's like, okay, well, we can't just keep saying that. What actually is it that's the something that's really special that affects the children, that affects the adults as well? Like, because I've come from an education background, it's a giant hassle to get 30 reception children to all put their coats on and all put their wellies on and go down to a park. And if you didn't think it was really rewarding and you didn't feel energized and remotivated by it, you just wouldn't do it. So there's something special for the adults as well. So
Yeah.
the lovely thing about taking a sort of post-human approach is that in thesis terms, you because you yourself as the researcher, you just have to accept that you're fully entangled as well. And that is quite liberating, because you can then just talk about whatever you want to talk about, and you can decide to look at things through this philosophical lens, through Bergson or Deleuze and Guattari or something, and just kind of like, make your meaning from it, because you were as entangled as everyone else, basically.
Yeah. I really wanted to talk to you. Like, we could talk for hours and hours, and I'm just conscious about how much of your time we're taking. But I just wanted to talk about that in terms of those of us who might not have actually engaged in very much research or spent very much time in that world might be aware of terms like qualitative research being more detailed life experience of people, interviews, that kind of thing, or quantitative data being more research being more data driven, and have maybe quite a narrow view of what research looks like and what doing research looks like. And in some of your work, you describe, for example, embroidering a map. You were just talking about yourself being entangled in forest school, and what's happening with the children, what's happening to the space is also happening to you. And so you embroidered a map, didn't you, of your wanderings or your sort of movements through the forest. And that kind of thing isn't something that I imagine, as people who are not involved in the world of research would even imagine could be part of research. Embroidery, for example. Can you tell us a bit about that, and about what other kind of maybe more left field research methods you used as part of your thesis?
Yeah, sure. I mean, and just to say, actually, I was totally in that position sort of 6-7 years ago. So I came out of teaching. I had only a vague sort of nodding acquaintance with qualitative research and ontologies and all sorts of things. So obviously that is part of the learning journey. It took me a while to think, okay, do I actually dare do this? Does this really count as research? Because it doesn't have a graph or any numbers in it and that kind of thing. But having, I think one of the nice things about doing your doctoral thesis is it's probably the most self-indulgent you can ever be. And the idea is to be creative and come up with some new ideas. I would say in forest school research, there's very little quantitative data collection. There's not very much, where you're going to like come out with numbers and graphs, because it isn't really the right kind of topic. So I guess the first thing to think about is your approach should probably suit the topic. So, for example, in research, if you wanted to find out, what percentage of adults in the UK smoke, that's a quantitative piece of research. You want numbers at the end. And if your question is more like, why do adults in the UK smoke in the face of all the sort of health advice, then that's more of a qualitative study. So actually you're going to have to do interviews and focus groups, or maybe, observe people, or maybe try and talk to them about, okay, what are the triggers? And so that's definitely a huge field. And I think that forest school sort of sits in that, because it's a very sort of, it's about people's sensory experiences, and it's about how they feel about things, how they feel at the beginning, how they feel at the end of the program. So lots and lots of qualitative research going on in that sense. But very often in a more conventional kind of research, the researcher tends to have to almost make a case for where they are. So I would have had to have said, okay, what are my biases perhaps here, and what's my position? Okay, my position is, okay, I'm an ex-teacher. I already think it's a good thing. So, you have to sort of write this chapter about where your positionality is in the more sort of traditional methods. So you're like very much out of the picture and trying to be objective looking in. So in my in the sort of more post-human way of thinking about things, about the intra-relationships, I'm very much in the picture. So I always don't have to explain my positionality. I don't have to pretend that I'm standing objectively at the back of the forest school with a clipboard. I'm actually getting in there and I'm getting stuck in. So what I thought to do, and this was towards the end of the study, was, okay, when I go to the forest school, I really don't know what I'm doing now. I'm just following people, following children. I'm fully entangled. I
think lots of people will recognise that feeling.
Yeah,
I don't actually know what I'm doing anymore. I definitely had that moment.
I was in that kind of discomfort. Am I actually doing anything? I have this sports watch, and obviously when you set it going, it's for tracking your runs, but I would just set it going at the beginning of the session, and then I would forget about it, and then ideally I'd remember to turn it off at the end. There was one time I didn't. But what it would do, it would make a map.
Like a GPS?
Yeah, a GPS map. So I could extract that, and then every week I would sort of extract them, and I made this picture where they were sort of going on top of each other, so layer on layer on layer, my own little tracks, and I began to use it as a way of seeing how the place was acting on me. So I had a map, and I could see, okay, that place where I keep going again and again and again, that's a real attractive place for me, and I never go here. And it just made me sort of reflect a little bit more on how the space was acting on me. And the way the embroidery came about was when I was doing it, and I had this digital map, and it was so far removed from how it felt. You know, when I was there getting stuck in the mud, there was this horrendous mud patch where I literally used to get stuck in or rescuing. I was thinking, is this actually data? Because it's so clean and weirdly linear. You know, what if I took it a step further and just created an artifact and sewed the tracks on a cloth map and sort of just made a thing and just said, good, this is my data. And so, yeah, that was my, you can do that kind of thing on your PhD.
I love that.
Yeah.
I
So
love that
cool.
because for me that really, as you say, that the methodology has to suit the topic and
Yes.
the world.
Exactly.
And
Yeah.
for me that absolutely sums it up, that you're making something, you're crafting something that is expressing an emotional and physical reaction to the place. And I just think that's magical and inspiring for those people who might be really intrigued by what's happening at Forest School and their experience of it, but go, oh no, I could never do research because that's just like number crunching and being really methodical and, you know, and I just think it's inspiring that you
I
can
would
do.
really like people to be just bold enough to think, actually, this is a field of its own, and rather than borrowing other people, you know, maybe curriculum outcomes or something, and because it's a very young field, but I think it's really, really powerful.
What do you, with the steps that you have kind of taken already in this kind of thesis work and everything and the research to kind of set it up that it can be researched and evidenced and done in a different way, what do you see as like coming down the line? Do you see that like an explosion of different researchers coming? Is it like, you know, like you said, trainee teachers are getting exposed to this like on their teacher placement, so is that going to springboard people to research stuff earlier in their careers? What's going to come from this kind of, hopefully this like opening up of research?
I mean, certainly there's an opening up in terms of post-human approaches to early childhood research, and that's only just beginning to be connected to Forest School. There's a couple of other people that I know of are doing it, but it's a reasonably new field, so I'm hoping that will be something that becomes something that is not so left field and actually is a way of talking about some aspects of Forest School that are quite hard to articulate to people who've never experienced it. One of the things that I really loved after I was talking about my ideas at the Forest School Symposium was another practitioner who I spoke to later on, who really, really got it. Like you said, Wem, just suddenly thought, oh my goodness, it's the stuff and the space, and had actually gone away and looked at, okay, what's the tree that child likes to go in, and why do they like that one and not that one, and had moved where the fire circle was, and really thought about, well, why does the fire circle always have to be in the same place, and just sort of like used the ideas to perhaps focus down a bit more on how the space is acting on the children.
And that's great because that's showing you that your research is actually having some impact. Because that's, again, like you said, you know, you say doing a PhD is the most kind of self-indulgent kind of time, but you ultimately do want your research to be read and for people to know about it and for it to influence.
Am I allowed to mention my book at this point then?
Oh, please do.
Yeah.
So I'm in the sort of final stages of authoring a book called Theorizing the Quiet Power of Forest School. That will be published by Routledge next year sometime. So that's sort of like the distillation of some of my ideas from my thesis and put into a book form.
Fantastic.
So, yeah.
Oh, congratulations. That's very exciting. Yeah. And so if that's out next year, whereabouts could people because obviously, you know, your whole thesis is beyond the scope of a podcast, but if people wanted to read more about your research findings and your methodologies and things, where can they go to find more of your work?
So it's if you Googled me, so if you Googled Joanna Hume at Northumbria University, then we all have a kind of staff profile. And then in there, you would find a link to a couple of papers that I've had published, and also my thesis. If you wanted to see a picture of the map with all the threads on, then that is in there. Yes.
Lovely. Amazing.
Oh, thank you so much. It's been, I know we've taken some very big concepts and, skated over quite some, but as someone that wasn't at your talk at the symposium, I am already going ping, 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 ping. Oh, this is very exciting.
Yeah. Is there anything else, Jo, that you think that we should have talked about, or that you definitely wanted to mention or discuss in this time?
I don't think so. I've had a really nice time. Thank you. just waffling on about my forest school ideas. I've loved it. Thank you so much.
That's what we're about. Lovely waffle. Thank you.